You ever walk outside your house, coffee in hand, only to discover a neon green cartoon version of yourself with devil horns spray painted across your fence, and right above it the words "Karen's Rules" in massive bubble letters? I did. And by lunchtime, there were black SUVs crawling through my yard, a Homeland Security drone hovering overhead, and Karen screaming that her teenage son was just expressing himself. She didn't know the fence he tagged was hiding a federal drone tower, and she sure didn't know tagging it had triggered a national cyber alert. I had just gotten back from a 2-day work trip, the kind where your phone barely works, and your body is running on hotel coffee and stale granola bars. All I wanted was a quiet morning. I stepped out into the backyard in my slippers, ready to enjoy the peaceful hum of summer cicadas and maybe toss a few pebbles into my koi pond. Instead, I was hit with the visual equivalent of an energy drink commercial sprayed across the cedar panels of my $6,000 privacy fence. The neon paint burned my eyes. Bright green, orange, and pink swirls twisted into the words "Karen's Rules," with an arrow pointing to a smug caricature of my face, complete with a unibrow and devil tail. I blinked 3 times. Nope, still there. I marched around to the other side of the fence, heart pounding. Karen was out front, watering her lawn like nothing had happened. Her teenage son Brax lounged in a lawn chair, airbrushed hoodie halfway down his back, earbuds in. I shouted across the yard, asking if she knew anything about the graffiti. She squinted at me like I'd asked if her grass was allergic to water. Oh, that? My Brax was just getting creative, she said, smiling like it was a compliment. You know how teenagers are. Expressive. He's an artist. And honestly, your fence was so depressing. Depressing? That fence cost more than your monthly HOA fees. And he vandalized it. Vandalized? She laughed. Don't be dramatic. He made it better. Besides, there are no rules against paint. I wanted to scream. But I didn't, because Karen thrived on chaos and I was too tired to play her games. So instead, I went back inside, made another cup of coffee, and turned on my work tablet. I wasn't just some homeowner with a tech job, I was a subcontractor for a very specific branch of the Department of Defense. And that boring fence Karen mentioned? It was carefully engineered to conceal the side panel of a secure drone relay tower, designed to look like an ordinary wooden structure. What Brax had done wasn't just tagging someone's fence. He had unknowingly spray-painted over a climate-cooled federal relay system disguised in the lower paneling. The second I pulled up the interface on my tablet, I saw it, a breach alert. The tower's access panel sensors had picked up interference, logged the chemicals from the aerosol paint, and pinged it as a potential tampering event. Not only that, but a backup camera had caught Brax in full action, mask half down, laughing as he filmed the whole thing for his social media. My jaw tightened. The system had automatically uploaded the data to the agency's secure servers, meaning this had already escalated past me. I stepped outside again just as Karen was telling her dog to sit for a treat. I tried one more time, politely asking if she would have Brax clean it off. She waved me off. Oh please, it's just paint. You're acting like it's some government secret back there. I nearly choked. Not a government secret. Just a classified drone control relay that if tampered with could trigger a national security audit. But sure, just paint. By noon, things took a sharp turn. A black Suburban pulled up outside my house. Then another. Then a matte gray van with what looked like satellite domes mounted on the roof. Karen came outside, now in full HOA queen mode, and strutted toward the agents stepping out in tactical polos and dark sunglasses. I stood back, watching the storm unfold. "Excuse me," she said, blocking their path. "Can I help you? I live here, I'm on the HOA board, and I've had some concerns about this man's structures." One of the agents looked at her blankly. "Ma'am, are you Karen Dunley?" Her proud smile faltered. Yes." He handed her a printed image. It was a zoomed-in still of Brax, mid-spray, tagging the tower wall with a phrase that said, "Catch me if you can," in bright green. Her face turned the color of skim milk. "We need to speak with your son." "What? No, he's a minor. You can't just—" "Ma'am, this is a federal infrastructure breach. Your son uploaded this footage publicly. We are now conducting a national security inquiry." I walked over, not to gloat, but because I knew I had to confirm access credentials. As soon as they saw me, the lead agent nodded and said, "Mr. Mallory, thank you for your earlier ping. We've got a full record now. The relay shows active tampering, and the AI flagged the chemical residue on the panel. Protocol escalation is underway." Karen looked like she had swallowed a cactus. "Wait, this is about your fence?" she gasped. "This is your fault." The agent turned to her with a face like stone. "Ma'am, your son defaced a restricted federal communications system. Whether or not he understood what he was doing doesn't change the fact that he endangered an active military data link." She sputtered something about boys being boys, and it was just some art. But it was too late. Another agent was already walking Brax out the door, who looked like he had just woken up and still had paint on his hand. The kid saw the agents and froze like someone had hit a pause button on his life. I didn't enjoy watching a teenager get scared, but I also didn't enjoy being the target of public humiliation over a fence that turned out to be a federal trigger point. By 2 p.m., the neighborhood was buzzing. Karen's phone was blowing up. Half the HOA was on their front lawns, pretending to weed or water, phones in hand, recording the scene. And just like that, Karen's reign as queen of the cul-de-sac was cracking. I stood by the fence quietly, sipping my fourth coffee of the day as the agents examined the spray paint. One of them, a younger guy with a clipboard, chuckled as he pointed out the drawing. "That's supposed to be you?" "Apparently. Looks like he gave you horns and a tail." "He got my bad side." The agent laughed. "Well, we've got a case now. This might go higher depending on what he touched. You'll be updated through secure email." I nodded and glanced back at Karen, who was now standing stiff as a lawn gnome while her son was being read his rights. Not arrested, but definitely documented. Her face had twisted into something between fury and disbelief, as if the world had suddenly stopped speaking her language. Little did she know this was just the beginning. Because if you thought tagging a fence was a teenage mistake, wait until you find out what happens when the federal government starts peeling back his TikTok uploads, one by one. The next morning felt like a strange dream that hadn't ended. I woke up early, expecting the chaos to have settled, but instead, I found a strange quiet hanging over the neighborhood, the kind of eerie calm that comes before a second storm. My phone had a new batch of encrypted messages from the agency, confirming that the breach was officially classified as a Category 2 incident, meaning it wasn't just local vandalism anymore. The footage Brax had uploaded was spreading. Apparently, some online conspiracy channels had grabbed hold of it and were trying to analyze every frame, convinced that the tagged structure was a gateway to some underground base. Karen's son had accidentally poked the most paranoid corner of the internet, and the government didn't like that. I looked outside and saw a pair of black sedans parked across the street. Agents in plain clothes were stationed in a car that, to the average eye, looked like a maintenance vehicle. But I knew better. They weren't just watching Brax. They were watching for any sign that someone else might try to tamper with the tower. The paint had already been chemically removed from the sensitive parts of the structure, but the damage to public trust and digital security was already done. The system had flagged Brax's phone's location history, tracked his online uploads, and now had a complete profile of him. It wasn't malicious, just standard procedure for someone who had unknowingly violated national infrastructure. The ironic part? He had no clue how deep he was in. And Karen was still convinced this was all just a scare tactic. She came marching over around 10 a.m., full-on bathrobe and slippers, carrying a clipboard like she was heading to a board meeting. She didn't even knock, just rapped her knuckles against the porch rail and started yelling. I stepped outside before she could cause a scene that would attract more eyes. Are you done? She snapped. Because I've had just about enough of this little charade. You're overreacting. All of you are. This is absurd. I blinked at her slowly, then sipped my coffee. Karen, this isn't about your son's art. He tagged a federal drone tower. She crossed her arms. Which is hidden behind your fence, meaning none of us even knew it existed. So how is that our fault? This is entrapment. I tried not to laugh. It's not hidden. It's designed to blend in. That's the point. It's also not your land, and your son filmed himself trespassing onto it. Her nostrils flared. It was just a joke. You don't arrest children for jokes. And that man, whatever he was, he told me they might charge him with federal tampering. That's insane. He's 15. He posted the video online, Karen, with tags like #DOD, #Area51, and #CatchMeIfYouCan. The agency has to respond to things like that. It doesn't matter if he meant it as a joke. Then you tell them to stop. You're the one who works with them, aren't you? You can make this go away. I took a breath, then stepped forward so she'd finally understand. No, Karen. I can't. And I wouldn't even if I could. You don't get to vandalize something you don't understand and then cry foul when there are consequences. She paused, eyeing me like I'd betrayed her somehow. Well, I talked to my lawyer. And I'll have you know I'm going to sue you. For emotional distress, for not warning us, and for constructing something potentially dangerous so close to my property. I stared at her blankly. Your lawyer's wasting your money. That structure's been there for 6 years. It's on federal land, behind a federally approved privacy fence. You just never noticed because you were too busy trying to run the HOA like a monarchy. She scoffed and turned, muttering to herself as she stomped away. I could hear her yelling on the phone before she even made it across the street. I didn't need to hear the words to know what she was doing, rallying her little group of board members, trying to paint me as the villain while ignoring the fact that her son had just triggered a Homeland Security response. An hour later, the real chaos began. The federal team returned, this time in full coordination. One of their internal analysts had tracked Brax's video to his TikTok account and discovered something worse. He had uploaded 3 more videos in the last month from locations that matched other secure sites. They weren't tagged as such, but Brax had a strange obsession with climbing utility boxes, poking around fenced-off buildings, and using clickbait titles like "Secret Tower Unlocked." It didn't take long for the agency to decide they needed full access to his devices. I watched from my porch as they knocked on Karen's door. She answered in a fury, then screamed when they presented a subpoena. She refused at first, tried to slam the door, but they were prepared for that. Within minutes, they were inside with a warrant. Brax was brought out again, pale and silent, holding his phone like it was a ticking bomb. Karen, of course, claimed harassment and tried to film the whole thing, but her phone was politely taken from her while the team did a security sweep. As soon as the footage was secured, I got a text from one of the analysts confirming that the TikTok videos had already been archived and sent to the legal team. One clip in particular had Brax unscrewing what he thought was a mystery panel and joking about it being a missile launch button. It was a small, rusted maintenance box on a backup grid relay. Totally harmless, unless you broadcast it to millions of followers as a joke about hacking the military. Then it became a problem. Around noon, Karen made her next mistake. She went online. I didn't even realize it until a neighbor sent me a link. Karen had gone live on Facebook, ranting about how her son was being targeted by government bullies, and that I was some kind of spy. She accused me of constructing illegal surveillance towers, of luring teenagers into federal traps, and even suggested I was recording people through their televisions. Her live video had 23 views. But unfortunately for her, one of those viewers was an agent monitoring the neighborhood's social media as part of the response protocol. 2 hours later, she received a cease and desist letter. The agents returned, not for Brax this time, but for her. They didn't arrest her. They didn't need to. They handed her a federal warning about the dissemination of misinformation related to classified sites and reminded her that further attempts to inflame the public could result in real legal action. That's when she finally began to understand the gravity of what had happened. That evening, I stood on my back patio, finally enjoying the quiet. Brax had disappeared from the neighborhood chatter, and Karen's house was completely dark. I heard someone approach and turned to find one of the agents from earlier walking up. "Just came by to say thanks for keeping calm," he said. "Most people would have lost it." I shrugged. I knew it would sort itself out. Eventually. He laughed. "Still, we're going to recommend the tower be given an upgraded perimeter. Your fence did well, but with neighbors like that." I smiled. "I'll take it as a compliment." As he left, I looked up at the tower. Harmless on the outside, but vital beneath. Just like me, I suppose, quiet, private, and minding my business until someone decides to poke the wrong thing. The neighborhood had changed now. Karen wasn't the queen anymore. Her son wasn't the golden child. And people were starting to realize that the storm that had started with a spray can wasn't finished yet. In fact, the more Karen tried to control the situation, the deeper she dug her own hole. 2 days after the federal agents left with Brax's phone and Karen received her cease and desist letter, the neighborhood entered a new phase of tension. Nobody said it out loud, but it was like everyone was just waiting to see what ridiculous move Karen would make next. And she didn't disappoint. She decided to go on the offensive. Her first tactic was to paint herself as a victim of overreach, staging what she called a peaceful protest on her own lawn. It consisted of 3 folding chairs, a handwritten cardboard sign that said "Free Brax," and a Bluetooth speaker playing a loop of a pop song about rebellion. Brax sat there, stone-faced and clearly humiliated, while Karen live-streamed her rant, claiming her family was under surveillance and that big fence government was targeting innocent people. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But when she filed a civil complaint against me at the local court, accusing me of emotional distress, unlawful concealment of government property, and psychological manipulation, I had to respond. It was so absurd that when my lawyer read the complaint, he nearly dropped his coffee. Still, it had to be dealt with formally. We didn't countersue, yet, but we did file a motion to dismiss with supporting documentation from the Department of Defense. Karen had no idea what she was up against. While she walked around the block handing out printouts of her complaint to anyone who would take one, I was sitting in a quiet government office reviewing encrypted emails with a federal legal liaison. Her accusations were not just misguided. They were dangerous. Then came the subpoena. The Department of Defense requested that Karen produce all communications related to the incident, including her online posts, her Facebook live stream, and any group messages that mentioned the tower. She responded by claiming it was a violation of her rights and tried to get a restraining order against me, insisting I had caused her son trauma. The judge denied it in less than a minute, after reviewing the initial report. That was the moment Karen began to unravel in public. It wasn't just a legal defeat, it was her illusion of control collapsing. Her neighbors, once fearful of her, started to distance themselves. A few even walked over to apologize to me for her behavior. Meanwhile, the feds didn't slow down. With access to Brax's social media, they uncovered a lot more than just a few prank videos. There were chat logs with his friends where they bragged about tagging weird buildings and finding hidden stuff. In one video that hadn't even been posted yet, Brax held up a bolt he claimed to have unscrewed from a government door. The feds traced the location, and it turned out to be another utility disguised site halfway across town. That one was only a dummy node, thankfully, but the damage to his credibility was permanent. The agents were remarkably patient. They didn't want to ruin Brax's future. But at some point, intent didn't matter. The pattern was clear. He'd been making a game out of infiltrating restricted areas and glamorizing it online. Karen didn't see it that way. In her mind, the government was picking on a misunderstood boy, and I was the snake who invited them in. She made her next move by trying to rally the HOA against me. That Saturday, she called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. She stood at the front of the room, red-faced, waving a stack of papers that she claimed were legal documents proving I had violated zoning ordinances. What she didn't realize was that half the board already knew what was going on, and the other half had either received direct warnings from the agents or were simply tired of her antics. I arrived 15 minutes into her speech, not planning to speak, but just to observe. She froze when I walked in, then doubled down on her claims. "He built a secret surveillance hub," she yelled. "And none of us knew. That's a safety hazard. A betrayal of trust. You're all fools if you don't see how dangerous this is." One of the older board members, a retired postal inspector, raised his hand and calmly asked, "And you knew this after your son spray-painted it and bragged about it online?" That shut her up for a second. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then she pivoted again, demanding a vote to have my property declared out of compliance with the HOA standards. The motion didn't even get a second. That was when she snapped. She stormed out, yelling that the board was corrupt and that real justice would come from the people. No one followed her. By the following Monday, Karen's story took a new turn. She appeared in a local newspaper, giving an interview where she accused federal agents of bullying a minor and referred to the drone tower as a disguised death machine. The article ran with a half-serious tone, treating her more like an eccentric than a whistleblower, and they even quoted me anonymously in the piece. The journalist had contacted me, and I gave them a polite statement. It's unfortunate that a simple act of vandalism has been turned into a public circus. The facts speak for themselves. That line ended up being quoted more than anything Karen said, which only enraged her more. She went on another Facebook tirade, this time getting flagged for misinformation and having her post removed. She was now on the platform's radar too. Later that week, the court date for her complaint finally arrived. It was a small courtroom, but the stakes were large. Karen brought Brax with her, dressed in a suit 2 sizes too big. I arrived with my lawyer and a printed affidavit from the Department of Defense Legal Counsel, along with a disc containing video footage, online uploads, timestamps, and chemical analysis from the paint used. Karen tried to begin with a passionate statement about motherhood and artistic expression, but the judge cut her off, asking directly if she was aware of what restricted federal infrastructure meant. She tried to dodge the question by talking about community values. It didn't work. Then came the part where my lawyer played Brax's video. The courtroom fell into silence as the screen lit up with footage of him tagging the drone panel while laughing and yelling, "Area 51 ain't got nothing on me." He then attempted to open a metal latch and said, "Wonder what this does," just before the security sensor cut the video. Karen gasped. She hadn't seen that one. Brax looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The judge leaned forward, removed his glasses, and sighed. "Let me be clear," he said. "What your son did could have triggered a much more severe response. The only reason this is not a criminal trial is because the agency involved has opted for leniency due to his age and the absence of malicious intent. But you, Ms. Dunley, have used this incident to smear your neighbor, defame federal officials, and clog the court system with a baseless complaint. This case is dismissed. Effective immediately." Karen tried to argue, but the judge raised his hand. "I will not warn you again. You are dangerously close to contempt." That was it. The courtroom emptied out slowly. Brax wouldn't even look at his mother. I walked past them without saying a word, but I did hear her whisper something as I passed. "This isn't over." But it was. Everyone in that room knew it. Karen had lost control of the days following the courtroom meltdown were strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, Karen wasn't patrolling the sidewalks with a clipboard, Brax wasn't loitering by the clubhouse with his phone out, and the HOA wasn't trying to micromanage my mailbox color. It was as if the entire neighborhood took a collective breath, the moment Karen's legal fantasy crumbled in that courtroom. But peace in a place like this never lasts long. Not when someone like Karen has a bruised ego and too much time on her hands. While she may have been silenced legally, she wasn't done trying to win in the court of public opinion. Her next move was a full-blown attempt at character rehabilitation, at least for Brax. She started small. First came the chalk drawings on the sidewalk, peace symbols, motivational quotes like "create, don't destroy," and oddly enough, one that read "justice is bigger than rules." Then came the community outreach, flyers she hand-delivered to every mailbox, offering Brax's services for volunteer cleanup jobs. No one really took her up on it, mostly out of awkwardness, but she didn't stop. She filmed him picking up trash that wasn't there, planting flowers no one asked for, and painting over a perfectly fine bench in the park just so she could post before and after photos online. The captions were all the same, from troubled teen to town hero. Everyone deserves a second chance. People weren't buying it. If anything, the over-effort only highlighted how artificial it was. One neighbor told me in confidence that they saw Karen staging litter in front of the playground just so Brax could be filmed picking it up. Another neighbor mentioned that Brax had quietly told his friends he hated every second of it but was on probation or whatever, so he had to deal. But the truth was, he wasn't on probation. The federal agency had opted for a kind of informal educational consequence, one that included mandatory community service and a public awareness effort. The most interesting part was that it was my idea. When I first proposed it, the agent in charge of the case raised an eyebrow. I suggested that rather than letting this kid get buried under a pile of legal outcomes, we guide him through a controlled, constructive experience, something that would make him understand what he nearly triggered. The agency agreed, and a plan was created. Brax would be required to film a formal apology, supervised by federal personnel, where he would explain the dangers of tampering with unknown structures and why posting misinformation online could lead to serious consequences. It wouldn't be a joke. It would be real. And it would be educational. The catch? It had to be his idea, or at least seem like it. So when the agent gently approached Karen with the option of Brax taking initiative by producing a public service announcement, she jumped on it like it was her ticket back to social redemption. The setup was simple. A basic video shoot arranged at the local community center, with a simple backdrop and two agents acting as technical supervisors. Brax would deliver a script approved by both his mother and the agency, with enough flexibility for his personality to come through. I wasn't invited to the shoot, but I got a copy of the final version, and I have to admit, it was both cringeworthy and unexpectedly effective. Brax sat stiffly in a metal chair, dressed in the same suit he wore to court, his sneakers peeking out from under the pants. He opened with a robotic, "Hi, my name is Braxton Dunley, and I'm here to talk about mistakes." For the next 5 minutes, he explained how he thought he was just making a funny video, how he didn't understand what the structure was, and how he now realized the danger he could have caused. He ended the video by saying, "Not everything is a joke. Not everything is safe. And not every fence hides a shed. Some hide consequences." It wasn't Oscar-worthy, but it worked. The video was posted on a government-sponsored education site, shared in local school districts, and even made the rounds in a few national digital safety forums. Karen, of course, tried to claim credit for the entire production, telling anyone who would listen that she had negotiated the whole thing personally. She even edited a copy of the video with her own title card at the end that read, "A Karen Dunley Restoration Project." The agency asked her to remove it, and when she refused, they issued a formal copyright strike. That was the end of her version. Still, the damage was partially repaired, at least for Brax. What Karen didn't expect was that Brax's new online following didn't include the fans he used to have. His prankster crowd vanished almost overnight. The kids who followed him for wild stunts and graffiti vids now saw him as a cautionary tale. In their world, going federal wasn't edgy, It was embarrassing. The new followers were mostly teachers, parents, and safety advocate. He went from rebel to role model, and not in the cool way. I overheard him one afternoon near the clubhouse grumbling to his friend, "My TikTok's a graveyard." They turned me into a public service announcement. It was probably the most honest thing he'd said all month. Meanwhile, Karen was still clawing for relevance. Her latest scheme was to launch a Karen Cares initiative, trying to rebrand her name into something positive. She printed tote bags, offered parenting workshops in the rec hall, and even pitched a podcast called Fence Talk with Karen, where she planned to interview neighbors about their experiences with overregulation. No one signed up. The HOA declined to sponsor her. And when she tried to post her first episode, the only person who showed up was one of the security agents assigned to monitor her online activity. He politely suggested she reconsider broadcasting misinformation again. While all this unfolded, I took a more subtle approach. With approval from the agency, I made enhancements to the privacy barrier, additional panels, upgraded locking mechanisms, and a few discreet surveillance features hidden within decorative lighting. I didn't advertise it, didn't brag, and didn't invite Karen to comment. But she saw it. I caught her peeking out from behind her curtains every time I worked on it. She knew something had changed. The funny thing was, she could no longer do anything about it. Her power in the HOA had eroded completely. Every attempt to regain authority backfired. At the next meeting, when she tried to bring up my unauthorized modifications, the board reminded her that the land was not within HOA jurisdiction and that she was currently under administrative review for bringing public scandal to the neighborhood. That night, as I grilled on my patio under the soft glow of the new tower security lights, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: calm. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just calm. The kind that settles in when you know the people who tried to ruin your peace have finally run out of move. Karen wasn't gone, but she was silenced, her influence fractured. And Brax? He was learning. Slowly, painfully, but learning. As I flipped burgers and heard the faint hum of the drone tower initiating its routine test, I thought about how ridiculous it all was. A spray can. A bored teenager. A fence. And yet it had unfolded into a national lesson about boundaries. Physical, digital, and social. I didn't need to win. I just needed to hold the line. And for the first time in a long time, the line was holding strong. It would have been the perfect ending if everything stopped there. Brax humbled, Karen disgraced, the neighborhood calm once more. But with people like Karen, silence never means surrender. It only means they're reloading. I should have known better than to believe she'd slink into obscurity without one final stunt. It happened 3 weeks after Brax's apology video went live. Just as life was beginning to feel normal again, I received an alert from the tower's motion sensor system at 2:34 a.m. The panel had detected movement, too close, too deliberate. I opened the live feed and watched, blinking through disbelief, as a figure in a hoodie crept around the side of the fence with a flashlight and what looked like a selfie stick. The face wasn't clear, but the gait was familiar. I paused the frame inside. Karen. She was holding her phone up, whispering into it like she was filming a spy thriller. I couldn't hear audio, but the captions she later tried to upload filled in the blank. Exposing the truth. Inside the government surveillance plot behind my fence. She had decided to try one last desperate move. Painting herself as a whistleblower uncovering something sinister right in our backyard. The fact that she was trespassing again, in violation of a very explicit federal warning, didn't seem to register. I didn't call the police. I didn't yell. I simply sent the footage to the agency. By sunrise, 3 federal agents were at her doorstep. They didn't go in guns blazing. They didn't even step onto her lawn. But they did knock, calmly, and hand her a sealed envelope. Another warning, this time with legal consequences clearly outlined. Karen would not be arrested, but any further violation, any additional attempt to interfere or publish false information regarding federal property, would result in charges. It wasn't a scare tactic anymore. It was the last warning she'd ever get. That day, for the first time, I saw Karen visibly shaken. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She stood on her porch, clutching the envelope, her mouth slightly open, and didn't say a word. What followed was the quietest week in recent memory. Her curtains stayed drawn. Brax was seen only once, being dropped off by what looked like a youth counselor. The HOA meetings resumed with a more civil tone, and for the first time, the board discussed adding a new amendment to the charter regarding respect for federal boundaries. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who inspired it. In the background of all this, the agency reached out to me about expanding the structure's shielding and security. Not because of what Karen had done, but because the incident had spotlighted a potential vulnerability in their cover systems nationwide. What began as a nuisance had actually helped improve federal infrastructure. I had unwittingly started a ripple effect, and they wanted to reward me for it. They offered me two options. One, a full relocation of the tower to a new site, which would mean decommissioning my fence setup and returning my yard to total privacy. Or two, an upgrade program, including enhanced security features, discrete environmental systems, and a small compensation fund that would allow me to invest further in concealment and property improvements. I chose the second, not because I wanted to keep the tower, but because I understood now that privacy was no longer about hiding, it was about protecting. I had the skills, the resources, and now the backing to turn my property into something smarter, safer, and far more secure. Ironically, Karen's meddling had given me the leverage to fortify the very thing she tried to destroy. The upgrades began discreetly. No big trucks, no signs. Just quiet workers with federal IDs and custom tools. Over the course of a week, the fence was reinforced with layered panels designed to block radar and infrared scans. A new landscaping plan was installed, native plants, decorative rock features, and lighting that masked cameras built into garden ornaments. It was beautiful and functional. The cherry on top was a small, wooden sign installed on the inside of the gate. It simply read, "Respect boundaries." I hadn't ordered it. One of the agents left it for me as a parting gift. I kept it. But perhaps the most unexpected development came not from the government or the HOA, but from Brax himself. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants near the south corner, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find him standing awkwardly at the edge of the path, holding a small box in his hands. His hoodie was clean, his shoes matched, and for once, his phone wasn't in sight. "I made this," he said. "For, saying sorry again." I took the box and opened it. Inside was a small drone, painted with my house's coordinates and the words, "Not everything is a target," on the side. It was clumsy, cheap, and clearly built from spare parts, but it was sincere. I nodded and told him I appreciated it. He said he'd been helping a local robotics club and was learning coding. He said the agents scared him at first, but one of them had actually offered him a list of resources to learn more about drones the right way. Then he said something that surprised me. He said he wanted to build real ones one day, legit stuff. Not for pranks, for good. I told him that was possible. I even offered to send him a few links to courses I knew. He nodded once, then left. No camera. No prank. Just a kid trying to course correct. It was the first real moment we'd shared. And it made me wonder, maybe all this wasn't just about fences and spray paint. Maybe it was about misdirection and how the right structure, when challenged, forces people to reveal who they really are. Karen, unfortunately, didn't have a revelation. She continued her spiral, just more quietly. Her podcast project died. Her newsletter stopped. And after a few weeks, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Rumor had it that she was moving out of state, to get a fresh start. Most of the neighborhood didn't bother saying goodbye. No one threw a going-away party. There were no farewell cards, no emotional send-off. She slipped out of the community the same way she had tried to dominate it, loudly and then with nothing to show for it. When the moving truck finally pulled out, I stood at the edge of my lawn and watched her SUV disappear down the hill. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I simply nodded once, as if closing a chapter of a book I hadn't meant to start reading but was glad to finish. A few neighbors came by that night to share drinks on my back porch. We laughed about the chaos, marveled at the calm, and toasted to what we all agreed was a new beginning. No one mentioned her name. Not out of fear, but out of relief. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills and the air cooled with the promise of fall, I heard the hum of the upgraded drone relay kick into its evening calibration mode. It was quiet, efficient, nearly invisible. Just the way it was meant to be. I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of bourbon, and let the silence settle around me. People always think fences are meant to keep things out. But sometimes they're built to hold things in, like boundaries, respect, and hard-earned peace. Karen never understood that. But the rest of us did. And now, at last, the neighborhood could breathe.